All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Becoming a Professional podcast. I am here today with Mary Tang, who is both a Beta Alpha Psi alum and a previous alumni rep. So I will let her give a little bit of an introduction.
Hi, thank you for having me. Like Mackenzie said, my name is Mary Tang. I currently work at KPMG as a campus recruiter in the Philadelphia office, supporting university recruiting at two universities in PA. Um, in terms of my background before getting into my current role, which we'll talk a lot about throughout this session, went to Temple University for undergrad for my major in accounting. Didn't want to do accounting originally. We can also talk through that. But did decide on it as a major. Understood the whole 150 requirement for CPA licensing, and opted to do my master's in accounting, also from Temple. So graduated in 2018 with my bachelor's and 2019 with my MAC. Passed the CPA exam. Thankfully, didn't know if that was going to happen, but got it done, and started my career at KPMG as an audit associate in Philadelphia before shifting into, like I mentioned, what I am now, which is in the campus recruiting space. So was super involved in Beta Alpha Psi in my junior and senior year. I was the chapter president during my senior year. Um, got really involved through just the just various opportunities at Temple to get involved with student orgs. Um, First got involved with Ascend, and then that trickled into Beta Alpha Psi. And it's definitely something that I still rep every single day. I'm wearing my Beta Alpha Psi t-shirt that I got at Temple years and years ago. And it's definitely, kind of paved the path for me in terms of, how I ended up at KPMG in audit and ultimately what I do now day to day as a recruiter. So I was really excited when Mackenzie reached out. I've been connected to her for a number of years through Beta Alpha Psi, actually. And when this opportunity came up, I said, why not? Hopefully what I share today is something that can help some of the students that are listening. And if you're curious to learn more, you might follow a similar career path, but you might not. So I just thank Mackenzie and the team for letting me be here today.
Absolutely. Mary was, I think, the first person to ask to come on the podcast when she saw a picture that we posted from our pilot episode in Las Vegas. So
Yes.
I've known Mary for a few years now from her time as, I guess, a regional rep
Yep.
with Beta Alpha Psi. And we'll talk more about that later, I'm sure. But just before we get into anything, and Mary, we talked about this before we started, but we just want to make sure to stress that as per usual, the opinions expressed on this podcast don't necessarily represent the views of Beta Alpha Psi as a whole. We always joke that we're the officially unofficial alumni podcast. And they also don't represent the views of our respective employers. And that's especially important because Mary is going to be speaking, at least in part today, about what she does for a living. So we just want to stress that her views expressed on this podcast don't necessarily represent the views of KPMG as a whole. Um, but with all that out of the way, Mary, and you kind of touched on this a bit, but why did you initially get involved with Beta Alpha Psi?
Yeah. So going to going to Temple's business school specifically, I should actually say, that program in itself, when you are a Fox student, they stress so much to you of getting involved. Do you want to have a good internship? Do you want to have a good shot at getting that internship or full-time job? And it's not just about grades. And I realized that very soon on at Temple. So I was sitting in one of my, I think it was an intro to HR class. This was freshman year, and they said, hey, this is like a class for every single business major. But as you go through your time at Fox, you're going to get more, focused on whatever your area of study is. You should consider getting involved with whatever organization. I think at Temple in the Fox school, we had like 20 to 30 different student orgs, and they were pretty like major specific. And at the time, I was just a general business major, had no idea what I was doing with my life.
Same.
Did like literally had no idea. Didn't I was so afraid of accounting, and I'll get to that. Don't you worry. um, but I was in that class, and they said, get involved, and that kind of just struck me, struck me, and focusing in on paying attention to what I want to do with my life and where I could get involved. So I didn't declare accounting as a major until my sophomore year. I believe it was the spring semester, or like right at the beginning of the spring semester. And I was sitting in it was the intro to accounting class, which I was just deathly afraid of. I just didn't think accounting was for me. But as a business major, every
Hmm.
business student, no matter what school, you have to take that accounting like 101 class. So I was in that class. They had the organization that actually came in. It wasn't Beta Alpha Psi. It was the Ascend organization, which is for Asian Americans who were in the business school. So that student org came by, they spoke, and they kind of just checked all the boxes for me. Being an Asian American individual, I wanted to be more involved and connected to that part of me. So that was nice to have that sense of belonging. Um, but at the time, I was also considering accounting as a major, and the reason why I actually chose accounting, and I think some students might actually agree with this. It seemed hard, but once I got into the class, when things balanced out, right, when the debits and the credits, which in reality they never they're never perfect in real life, but my homework, all of that, it all made sense. Everything equaled out. It was problem solving. That was why I declared the major. So I see this, Ascend come in, and they're talking about being an Asian org for business students, checking all those boxes for me. And this particular Ascend chapter at Temple was in the accounting department. So I was like, all right, well, I'm declaring accounting as a major most likely. So checking off all these boxes. And the fourth box was I need to get involved in a student org. So checked all those boxes, got involved, started going to the Ascend meetings, and then that's when I got introduced to all of the other accounting orgs within the accounting department at Temple. So got involved with Ascend, figured out Beta Alpha Psi was a thing. And what struck me about Beta Alpha Psi was the fact that it was an honors org for
Hmm.
the accounting, finance, and MIS students. So that was kind of the intro to it. I was like, I don't know if I'm like good enough for it because I don't know if I have the grades. I just declared accounting. Um, but as I got more involved with Ascend, I subsequently got more involved with Beta Alpha Psi. The faculty at Temple, and specifically in the accounting department there, they really challenge the students, especially if you were already involved with Ascend, with NABA, whatever the org was. They would say, well, these are great orgs to be a part of, but consider joining Beta Alpha Psi if you want that honors distinction. So that's how I got involved. I kind of got coerced into it from the faculty, and honestly, though, it was the best decision because then I got to meet a lot of people, and the one thing that I said when I was in Beta Alpha Psi, when I would start trying to recruit students into, becoming members and candidates, I'd always say to the Temple students, I would say the accounting major specifically, that's great, you're involved in Ascend, so am I, you're involved in NABA. We had a IMA chapter at the school too, the Institute of Management of Accountants. So all those orgs, we would always say these are great organizations, but none of them have the honors distinction. So
Hmm.
that's how I would always sell it to the students. It's great to be connected, with Ascend and meet other Asian Americans that are in business, but you would also get that same benefit at Beta Alpha Psi too, right? Beta has all the members from Ascend, from NABA, a lot of the other accounting orgs. So that's how I kind of got convinced into it, and that's subsequently how I also convinced a lot of students to join the organization too. So long-winded in how I got into Beta Alpha Psi, right? Because it started off at one
Right.
organization first, but just to showcase how connected all of these organizations are. And I hope by sharing that story with anyone listening, again, you might be in the same situation at your university, but the one thing that Beta has that not every organization does is that honors distinction. And I would go into interviews and they would already know what
Hmm.
Beta Alpha Psi was, especially if you're getting recruited by the Big Four or any of the regional accounting firms. Like they all knew what that was. And
Absolutely.
so that just kind of struck me. And being a recruiter now, like I look for the Beta Alpha Psis, right?
Hmm.
And so like full circle that I was once told that, and now I'm in the shoes of recruiting those students, and I definitely look for those who have the grades and have the involvement. And they're just doing the extra step that not every single student is doing. So
Yeah. We've touched on that in previous episodes as well. And one of the things that I guess I found out pretty early on as an accounting student was um, firms aren't able to request any information about GPA, right, when they recruit students. But when you see Beta Alpha Psi on the resume, you know it's an honors organization. You can
yeah,
infer that the student has a top tier GPA, just
right,
from their
right.
membership. Yep.
Yep.
Absolutely. So, how has the organization then taken you from college into your career? How has it helped you out?
Yeah. So, and you touched on this, and I didn't provide it in my intro, but so once I graduated from Temple, there was the opportunity to sign up for, or apply to, I should say, the alumni rep position. So I can't recall how many, and you probably know, how many regions there are, but I was a regional alumni rep for the Atlantic Coast, which covered the Atlantic Coast region, which was about, I think, 60 or 70 so student chapters. Um, so I graduated, and I knew I wanted to stay involved. I was really fortunate to have had such a great recruiting experience with a lot of the firms. And when I saw this application come out, I said, if I can't get super involved on campus just yet, as an associate, what else can I do? So when I saw the app, I applied. And essentially, what the role means, for those who don't know what it is, it's a way for alumni to get involved and get connected with the region that they're in. So Beta Alpha Psi has a lot of regions, and they have regional meetings every single year, which then flow up into the annual meeting, which is more of the national effort. So in my first year as an audit associate, I was able to serve as an alumni rep, and my role was really to find. I don't think there was actually a number of reps or alumni that I had to identify, but my primary job was to create an alumni panel for the Atlantic Coast regional meeting. Um, that was the COVID years. So I found
Yeah.
a great a group of folks in the Atlantic Coast. I remember there was an individual who was sitting in New York. There was somebody that I found that was a West Virginia alum. I think I used you too, Mackenzie,
hmm
for the panel as well.
I was supposed to
Um,
take the train out to, was it Pittsburgh?
Pittsburgh, yep.
Yeah, I had
So,
my train ticket and everything.
and I remember Well, I remember figuring out when the meeting was, and
hmm
I was talking to at KPMG, we call them PMLs, your performance or people management leader, I should say. I think that's the correct acronym. Um, but that individual is pretty much the one who kind of oversees you throughout your time at KPMG. They make sure you're on track for promotion, all that kind of stuff. And so I want to get promoted, but I don't want to get dinged because I have to go to Pittsburgh because of this conference, this meeting. So I told them, like, literally, like, I think it was like the second or third day, like, on the job. And I was like, by the way, like, I'm already really involved with Beta Alpha Psi. I have this regional meeting that I have to go to in Pittsburgh, and I'm pretty sure the meeting was going to be like right around like when
I
my
know
audit
exactly
client.
when the meeting
Yeah,
was.
well, yeah, it
It
was.
was March 13th,
Yes, March 13th and
2020.
2020. And I remember that we were supposed to issue like right around, I think it was like March 7th that we ended up issuing. You don't know that until,
hmm
as time approaches. But I remember talking to my PML, I remember talking to my engagement team, the manager on my team, and I remember he said, "Well, this is not preferred because that's like the busy season, but you're telling me like literally it seems like a year in advance at this
Yeah.
point." I told them so early. And he was like, "That's fine. Like, book your trip to Pittsburgh. Everything's good." I booked the trip to Pittsburgh, and turned virtual, and so
Oh, but
it.
the kicker is I don't think we had had a ton of interaction before
No.
this, but this week really cemented our friendship because on Tuesday, if memory serves, we lost our keynote
Yep.
for the conference. And I mean, this is like early COVID, right? So at
Yep.
this point, I remember watching the news at work and hearing people talk about like going to Costco and buying like 50-pound
Oh.
bags of rice. We're in
Yep.
that week of COVID,
Yep.
right? Like the week where nobody knows what's going on, but everybody is starting to hoard toilet paper.
Yes.
We lose our keynote on a Tuesday. The meeting's on Friday. I think on like Wednesday or Thursday, we scrapped the whole thing. It went virtual.
And
And
I had no idea what was happening because
yeah.
like this is us partnering from everywhere across the country,
Hmm.
and like you're just being told like you're there to support Beta Alpha Psi, me, right? And like providing
Yep.
these panels, and I have to just figure out and listen to what Beta Alpha Psi, the organization, the leaders there, what they've decided.
Well, and
And
KPMG too, because I was at KPMG at the time as
yeah.
well. And we were just in two different offices. And it was getting to the point where we were like, are we going to be allowed to travel? And I remember the day because for two reasons. Number one, it was Friday the 13th, and that's hilarious. And number two, because it was quite literally the last day that the office was open for
Yes.
well over a year.
I just had no idea like what was going to happen, and like I think I booked a flight. I don't think I booked like a train, but I'm just like monitoring, and like
Uh huh.
I don't know if I mentioned this earlier. The area of audit that I worked in was healthcare. So like those were my like that was like the industry that I was in, and like we had no idea what was happening too. And like, I remember my senior manager, he walked into like our little audit conference room at the client site, and I remember him asking, this is probably like 2 weeks before, the world shut down. And he was asking the client, he's like, so like, are you gonna have like a disclosure in there about like COVID? Like you guys
Mm
are like a healthcare company, and like it like I just distinctly remember all of this, right?
hmm. Mm hmm.
Leading up into, the conference did it did happen just virtually, right? But
Right.
it was such a weird time, and it's interesting because I never got to meet a lot of those people. I don't even think, Mackenzie, we've met in
We have
person
not. I
just
thought about
yet.
this earlier today.
So it was an interesting time. We still had a great panel, but that's how I brought Beta Alpha Psi into my first year at KPMG as an audit associate, and now as a recruiter, I'm still heavily involved. As an alum altogether, still involved. I think when I became the alumni chair for the Atlantic Coast, I remember being connected to you. There were, I think, two alumni regional reps at the time when I started at KPMG, and then you were super involved as I forget your role. You were
I was the alumni task force chair
yes, so
during
like
your year as regional rep,
you
and then
were
I
like
rolled onto the board.
right. So you were like kind of keeping us like all together. And I remember being on calls with you. And because there were three KPMGers at the time just involved
Hmm.
officially with Beta, I remember you connecting me with Jennifer Neal, she works on my team and on the University Town Acquisition team at KPMG. And she oversaw the relationship with Beta Alpha Psi. And you guys created this like monthly call for all the alum that were at the firm that were super involved with Beta Alpha Psi. And so it turned into that, and I was involved as a audit associate, right, with the recruiting team, and now I'm literally the recruiting team that supports a lot of this. So it's cool to see it. It's cool to come back. It's cool to come back and support, whether it's my local chapter at Temple, whether it's, this podcast with you. I stay pretty in the loop with Beta. I don't think it'll ever go away. It's definitely, I would say, probably like the one of the more memorable years of my college experience, and why I feel so passionately about remaining involved and doing whatever I can to support the org. So, full circle, 1000%.
Love it. So tell us a little bit more about what you did with Beta in college and like
Yeah,
especially when you were chapter president.
yeah. The one thing I'll start off with saying that I regret not doing is applying for gold chapter status. I didn't read the rules fully to understand that we did qualify. I thought that we did not qualify. And the reason why I thought that, we were, I think we were superior. You have to be superior 2 years in a row in order to qualify for gold, and I didn't know if that second year could be the year that you were applying for superior. So I just said, "Oh, I didn't read it thoroughly." So that's the one thing I regret. But to answer your question, what did I do in my years as chapter president? We were distinguished the previous year, or 2 years prior, excuse me. And the chapter was really trying to kind of reestablish ourselves and get back to superior. I remember at Temple, we had an actual office for all of the accounting orgs. And I think at the time there were 4 or 5 accounting orgs. And that was why we were trying to reestablish ourselves, right? There were so many different orgs at the business school.
Hmm.
Then there were so many orgs in the accounting department, right? And so when I mentioned like earlier recruiting members to come into Beta Alpha Psi, you really had to recruit them because
Yeah.
there were 5 orgs that they could choose from in the accounting department alone. Um, and the other accounting orgs were fantastic. I was involved with another one, but we just had a lot of work to do to establish ourselves and figure out a way to, you know, find new members and retain them. So we actually changed my year. We kind of changed everything of how we were going to do reporting, how we were going to do recruiting, and get folks interested. So a lot of meetings with the accounting faculty in the department. So they actually helped subsidize some of our membership dues, which were fantastic because dues for Beta Alpha Psi, I mean, they're not cheap. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, now that I'm a professional, it doesn't seem that expensive. But as a
But when we were
student,
broken in
yeah,
college,
when we were
yeah.
broke in college, that was the most expensive org to join in the accounting department. And so we had to figure out a way to get students
Hmm.
interested. So had a lot of meetings with the accounting department to figure out ways to subsidize. So I think the dues, I think annual dues are like what, $80 or something like that. I think that's what it is nationally. And we were charging 85, so the chapter made $5. For like, we were trying to like have pizza money, right, for when
Right,
the
right.
KPMGs
Yeah.
would come out. So that's what the extra $5 were. Um,
Pizza money's always good.
but so talked a lot with the department, and we ended up getting money from them, which was fantastic, to bring it down from $85 for the dues to be what it appeared to be was like, I think it was like 40 or 50 to the students. So it was in line with the
Hmm.
other student orgs. But the caveat was you had to meet all your candidate requirements in order for you to qualify essentially for that scholarship, if you will. Um, and if you didn't reach it, then you would have to, pay that back to the chapter. So that's how we got students to get interested, because it was cheaper dues, but there was the risk that they'd have to pay that additional, 50 if they didn't meet the requirements, because you took that spot from somebody else. Um, so that was like step one. Step two was to just change the way that we do reporting. In years prior to me, it was a point system. So it was like 10 points per meeting or whatever it was, 20 points or something for probably for like community service. And it didn't make sense. Like, why are we doing a point system when Beta Alpha Psi we track on an hour system?
Hmm.
So we just
Which
went
has
back to
since
something.
changed, by the way.
Well,
It's
so you
points
can
now.
now it's points, but it was hours when I was a student. So maybe
Same.
they should change it back to points then if my Temple chapter is listening. But we changed it to hours so that we could track a little bit better. Um, and I had an amazing reporting officer. I had him kind of just like do math, because we're all accountants here, and kind of figure out what do we have to like, what is the minimum that the members have to reach to be active, for us to also be an active chapter and reach all the requirements that we need to. So he figured it out, and I think our requirements that year, which I think is still the case maybe to this day for our student chapter at Temple, but I think it was like you had to meet like 10 professional hours, which were, the weekly meetings with the firms coming in, and they had to reach, I wish I remember the number, probably like 6 or 8 hours of community service. And then they also had to attend our what we called professional events, or I'm sorry, signature professional events, which were like the big career fairs that we planned with all the firms, and big panel discussions. So that was step two of just revamping how we tracked, and figuring out how to offer those hours in a way that was beneficial to our organization, but also beneficial to the students. And then step three, what I also did, not just me, but my team, I think we had like 7 e-board members, figuring out interesting meeting topics and ideas, because again, there were 5 other accounting
Yep.
orgs, and they were bringing a lot of the same representatives in the same firms. So I remember talking with, again, our faculty advisors and a lot of just different faculty members, and kind of coming up with ideas. And the one I remember, we had a couple of faculty that were partners at different firms. So we had a panel with them, excuse me, a panel with them to learn about how to become a partner. Like, what does that mean? Like, how much do they make? Is it very does it vary depending on how long you're there? So
Do you
that I
know
remember
how long
that.
it took me to figure out that there was a buy-in, that they had to
Yes,
buy into the partnership?
it's a partnership. And so we learned so much.
I
Like,
was working before I knew that.
no one knows this stuff, because when
Yeah,
you're an accounting major, like, I think a lot of folks think that maybe I can be a partner one day, but they don't know what that actually means. So we
right.
so we had a topic on that. We brought a lot of alum back. There was an alumni from Temple who he was. I think he also taught. He was also a faculty member like years prior, but he's a sports agent now. So like we brought in a sports
That's cool.
agent to come back to Temple. We planned a golf outing for the first time. We planned a lot of panel discussions with C-suite individuals locally in Philly. So we brought in the chief accounting officer from Wawa, the chief executive officer of Saxby's Coffee. So figuring out just logistics of how to bring just interesting people to campus. We had the CFO from the Phillies come out, and he brought the World Series ring, and I remember him passing it around the audience while he was up at the panel. And I remember back then everyone taking pictures, posting on
That's
like
awesome.
Snapchat and like Instagram of it. So like thinking of like interesting things to do. So that was what I really focused in on my years, because like when you're a senior and you already have your full-time job, like how do you keep those students engaged and keep coming back? So
Yep.
it was thinking differently, and not just the typical info session, from KPMG. And now as a recruiter, I'm like, I don't want the basic info session. I want something different. And so and we'll talk more about it, but those years in Beta Alpha Psi and in the brainstorming that I did, and bringing the people that I brought to campus, working with the university recruiters that I did, that was the beginning of creating that interest in me of wanting to be a recruiter.
Yeah, and probably made you
Um,
a better
I
recruiter.
probably, I mean, I hope so. I don't know if my candidates will say I'm a good recruiter, but that's what transformed what I thought of when it came to my career. And so that transformed all of it. That was the genesis of who I am today, and what I do today for a living. And you asked earlier about Beta Alpha Psi in college versus Beta Alpha Psi now as a working professional. If I didn't have Beta Alpha Psi in college, if I wasn't the chapter lead, like I probably wouldn't be in the role that I'm in today. So I think a lot of what I have in my life right now, and what say is my dream job. Like I have my dream job, which maybe people don't think it's a dream job, but being an accounting major, like this was pretty attractive, this
Hmm.
role. I still get to use my accounting degree. I still get to meet accounting students. I get to bring them into the firm, and I get to meet a lot of great people. But that's what drove me to what I do today. And if I didn't have Beta Alpha Psi, again, like I said, I probably wouldn't be here. So
Love it. So, for anyone who's listening, I'm sure you can tell. I mean, we're both alumni. We're both still involved with Beta Alpha Psi. There are tons of opportunities for alumni to become involved if you would like to continue giving back to the organization. Would love to put a plug in here before we transition to part two of this interview for the Alumni and Member Network. If you're not on it, get on it, because that's a great way to network and even find new people that you might not know were Beta Alpha Psi alums in your region. So, I mean, we do have some C-suite executives on there. We have current members from all different schools, and especially if you're like me and moved halfway across the country post grad, it's a great way to network. So, but yeah, like I said, I mean, this is kind of a nice segue into talking a little bit more about your career and how you ended up as a campus recruiter, because as you mentioned, that's not how you started. So, how did you make the switch?
so I knew really early on. When I say early, I mean in college. I knew that I wanted to be in campus recruiting. Um, And I had a honest conversation with one of the faculty members who I still talk to this day, so definitely a mentor of mine. And I can't recall, I think it was my junior year that I started thinking about it, and then senior year was really when it hit, when I was like, do I consider this as a career? But I talked to that faculty member at some point, either junior or senior year, and I said, "Hey, I have a really strong interest, I think, in recruiting." And he was like really honest with me, and he said, you have the accounting background, like, why don't you go through with it? Like, let's see where this goes. Um, and I said, okay, but it's in the back of my mind. Like, I think I want to consider this at some point if it becomes a reality. And it was definitely senior year because I had finished my KPMG internship. And at some point in that senior year, I saw a job posting on LinkedIn, and it was for KPMG and it was for campus recruiting. They were looking for a campus recruiting coordinator. Um, and I remember seeing that, and I emailed my campus recruiter at the time from KPMG, and I already signed my audit like full-time job offer. And I was like, "Hey, like, I just saw this, like, I'm not saying that like I need to switch right now, but like, is it a possibility? Um is this even something that a campus candidate could even entertain? Like, I don't know, like, maybe it's not." And she said to me, "Well, what is it that you think you like about recruiting?" And I said, being in Beta Alpha Psi right now, like, I talk to recruiters all the time, and I love event planning, and that's, at the time I didn't know like project management, like I didn't know what that term meant. Like, now
Right.
that I work, I know what project management is, and like
Yeah.
I do that for a living. And I just explained that to her. I'm like, I like planning these things, and it's just talking to all these different people and brainstorming and bringing this idea to life is what I really enjoy. And so she challenged me a bit, and she said, well, if it's about winning, right? You could be in audit and you could win clients. Like, that could be you one day if that's what you like about recruiting. And I was like, okay, like, I don't know, like, sounds a little bit different. But I also kept that in the back of my mind. Um, but whatever. So the conversation didn't go anywhere because I still ended up in audit. So I started my career in September 2019, in audit in Philadelphia of KPMG. And I mentioned PMLs earlier. Again, that's just a term that we use at the firm where you just have a supporter, that person's in your back corner that's helping you move through your KPMG journey. And I had a meeting with him, I think 2 days, 3 days into my job. And I think I said to him, if I remember, I think I said to him that early. I was like, I have a really strong interest in campus recruiting. So I don't know if I said to him that I wanted to be a recruiter, but I definitely said, in my time in audit, I want to get involved and I want to give back and I want to go to campus and I want to tell students why they should come to KPMG. So got involved that way, from just a campus recruiting helper, if you will, as a professional. And I really started thinking about my career, once I got done a busy season. I was like, I just don't know if this is it for me. But I couldn't leave audit because I passed my CPA exams. Like, I passed, I
Hmm.
think I took my last exam right before work, the first day of work. So I remember because CPA exam was September 5th, I believe. Graduation was September 6th, and then the first day of KPMG was September, I believe, 9th of 2019. And I found out that I passed 2 weeks into work because
Hmm.
of how the score release went. And so I passed the exams. I was like very fortunate. Didn't have to study at all while working at KPMG, but I didn't have the hour requirement to be able to call myself a CPA. I passed the exams. Passing the,
Yep.
the exams is one thing, but you got to get the work experience. You have to get the number of hours. So my first busy season, I was only 6 months in. You need a full year of work experience, and I think it's like 1,000 hours in Pennsylvania. So I said, I can't go anywhere. Like, I worked too hard for that CPA to not get my CPA,
Yeah,
the,
you
the
did
three
the hard
letters
part.
next to my
You
name.
passed the
Yeah.
test.
So I said, I gotta keep staying here. I gotta, figure this out. And but that's why I also stayed in accounting and in audit, because I paid a lot of money for my undergrad and my master's to get the CPA itself. All the firms, they reimburse you for a lot of this stuff, but it's still a lot of time. It's not like money is
Hmm.
not just the only investment, it's time that you invest. So I said, well, I picked this major. I liked it. Like, let me just let me just go with it. I have to get the CPA next to my name anyways. Let me just stay. And my big question, and what I always tell people when I tell the story, is I had to prove to myself that I could do it, which I could, but I also had to figure out if I wanted to do it. And being able to do something versus wanting to do something is two very different things. So fast forward, I get the work requirements that I need to get my CPA. And right after that moment, it was August of 2021, I believe. Or no, August 2020, excuse me. August 2020 was when I got everything done and I applied for the license and I was good. And then 2021 came around and I was like, I gotta like really like I don't want to do this anymore. That's what I figured out. Like I don't want to do it, but I'm still really passionate about accounting, like the industry. So I started looking into applying internally. At the time, they had an internal job posting for a rotation in campus recruiting. I applied to it. I interviewed everything. I didn't get it. I tell this story all the time because I don't think students, not just students, people, they don't talk about failure enough.
Hmm.
I did not get the offer for the rotation to be in the exact job that I'm in. And at the time, I'll be honest, like I was a little bit salty about it. I was like, oh, like I'm like such a great choice. Like, why wouldn't they choose me? Um, and I didn't have the time in my eyes. I thought that if I stayed too long, I would never have the opportunity to leave. There were a lot of campus recruiting positions externally being posted by competitors. So I said, I'm gonna take a leap of faith. I want to be with KPMG, but it's not happening. It doesn't seem. So I left the company. I left audit. I left the company in June 2021. I was up for promotion too, because we do promotions in audit in July. I was asked to be an in-charge senior, and I guess I wasn't asked. I was voluntold that I was going to be an in-charge senior on an engagement, and I just said I have to just go with my gut. So I was interviewing with a lot of companies, and I landed a campus recruiting gig at JP Morgan Chase, and it was really fulfilling work though. Actually, I was in charge of their diversity recruiting partnership. So working with the Ascends, the NABAs, Alphas. So that was really really rewarding for me
Hmm.
to do campus recruiting, get that on my resume, but to also have that diversity aspect because I'm very passionate about DE&I, and I did that. And but the difference was, and maybe it's the same for you, Mackenzie. Like I didn't look at banks when I was an accounting major. Like I only looked
Yeah,
at
no,
the accounting firm, like the big four, the regional
I was a
firms.
finance double major and I was like, I
And
don't
you
think
never
this is
looked.
for me.
Yeah. So I was a finance double major for like a hot minute, and then I did not do well in my intro to finance class, and I dropped that immediately because if I didn't drop it, I would have, as a finance major, I think I would have failed the class with the score that I got. I'm not going to say what score that I got because that's not beta alpha psi standards. But I didn't do well, so I dropped the finance major, and that's why I did the Mac program. But
I also
anyways,
dropped class in
yeah.
college and we're here now. So it gets better.
It does. But then I think back to it because I never looked at the banks, and I was working at the bank and it was just different. Like it just didn't have the same culture that KPMG had, and I can't say the same culture that some of the other firms had because I never worked at the other firms, right? But I can say confidently that it didn't have the KPMG culture that I missed. Um, I did say to myself at the beginning, this your goal was to be a campus recruiter for an accounting firm, not necessarily big four, but just an accounting firm because you're more familiar with the roles, you just know it. So
Hmm.
took the leap of faith of going to JP Morgan. But I said, if it's not a fit, Mary, like reevaluate in 6 months and a year and figure out what your next step is going to be. Well, 6 months, literally 6 months to my start date at the new company that I was at, I saw a posting on LinkedIn and it was KPMG, Senior Associate, University Talent Acquisition. They rarely post what school you will recruit for externally, and even internally they don't tell you what schools you could recruit for. But this one they wrote, it's at Penn State University. That was the exact position that I applied to back a couple months prior that I didn't get. So it seemed to me that whoever was in the role just after the rotation, like the rotation may or may not yield a full-time permanent placement. And I think that it did, but this individual did the rotation and didn't want to return full time. And luckily for me, I saw the job posting and I got to re-interview and come back. So, um, but it just kind of seemed like the stars were all aligning because I saw the job posting literally at that 6 month right date, and then I got the invitation to interview, and the day of my interview, this is why I say the stars aligned. The day of my interview, the previous recruiter in that role, she reached out to me on LinkedIn and she said, "Are you thinking about coming back to KPMG? Like, we have a couple job postings." And I said, "Well, funny enough, like I'm actually interviewing for your old job in a couple hours. So hopefully this is a good sign." And, I lo and behold, a couple days later, I got the call, I got the job offer, and this is the story of how I got back. And so I said at the beginning of this, I don't, people don't talk about failure enough, right? And so some people, they might not like that story. If it were them, like maybe they would have declined the job because KPMG didn't give it to them right off the bat, right? But for me, I said this was the ultimate goal. This was the ultimate dream for me, my dream job. And I would be foolish if I let me being upset, 6 months prior about me not getting the job to prohibit me from fulfilling the actual goal. And so a lot of the candidates that I've met through my now 2 years in this job, I've told this story multiple times. And I tell it to them because you may or may not get a job offer from KPMG. You may or may not get the job offer from whatever firm you're applying to. It doesn't mean that in 6 months, in a year, 5 years, 6 years, that you can't be at that company again. And so I'm called what's a boomerang, right? So I
Yep.
boomeranged very quickly. Usually it's not 6 months that people come back, um, but I did, and I am eternally grateful for the job that I have now and what I get to do because, I'm very fortunate that it is with KPMG too because I have been with the firm, like this is home for me, and so I know the culture and I know what our firm is and what we do and what we stand for, and so when I came back to the firm, it was like I didn't have to do the trainings on how to
Yep.
clock time. I didn't have to do the trainings on how to like view all of like my, all the personal things on your profile and all that. So it was, onboarding was piece of cake when I came back. And so now it's been almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years this November.
That's
And I'm
crazy. I can't
just, I
believe it's been that
know.
long.
I know. It feels like I never left though too. I mean, 6 months is a long time, but it's just crazy to it's crazy to say that I left the company. Like that blows my mind. But what blows my mind even more is that I've been back, even longer.
Hmm.
So, but I'm grateful for it, and I have a job that fits what my personality is, and I get to still use again my accounting background, and I can talk to students about the CPA exam, and it's just the best of both worlds. So it's a great gig for
I
sure.
love it. So now that you are a recruiter,
Hmm.
if you can take us back in time to your first career fair as a student,
Hmm.
right? How would you grade yourself from a recruiting lens? How'd you do?
Like not good at all. um,
Same.
I when you sent this question ahead of time, I like really thought about this. So my first career fair, I didn't go to the university wide career fairs. I went to the business school one just because I knew what I wanted to get out of it. I knew what companies I wanted to meet, and I remember it was my sophomore year, and I think it was the spring semester, and so the way that Fox does it, when you check in, they give you like a little map of here's where all the companies are going to be at,
The
and they
gnat.
list all the
Sorry.
companies. Oh no, you're good. Um, and I saw on there like the big four. Like at that point, I was an accounting major. Like I knew what I wanted. I knew who I had to talk to, and I'm looking at the list, and I'm like, the one thing that they taught in our professional development course, which all business majors had to take as well at Temple, they said when you're at a career fair, do not talk to like the first company that you talk to. Do not talk to the one that you want because especially if it's your first time at a career fair, like
You
you
need to
might
warm up.
mess up. You need to warm up.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that they said that because if I went to KPMG, probably wouldn't have gotten the job. But the first company I spoke to, I think it was Crayola was there. I looked at the list and I was
Well,
like,
that's cool.
it was a cool company, but a company that I knew that I wasn't
Yeah.
gonna go for, and I was so nervous. My hands were probably like all sweaty, and like I don't even remember my 30-second elevator pitch, but it did not go well because I looked at that
They never
professional's
do.
eyes and he was just like who are you? Like you can't even articulate who you are and like but I got that it was so awkward. I can't remember what I said, but like I think I might have like giggled or something. Like I just like there was like nerves pent up and whatever. That conversation lasted like all of maybe like 2 to 5 minutes probably. And I walked away and I literally just was like, oh my God. Like
And
I
that
just
2 minutes haunts
and
you to this day.
and I literally just stood there and I was like, like I like breathed and I was like, get it together. It's like you are about to
Yep.
like you want an internship, right? And so after that, then that's when I started talking to like the finance, like just the FS and accounting firms and all that. And I think the next company I spoke to was Vanguard, which is a really big, financial institution locally here in southeastern PA. And I spoke to them. I knew I didn't want to go for them because I was an accounting major. I knew they hired accounting majors, but that was like my next step. It was like, all right, so I did the Crayola one, which did not apply to me. Then I went to more of a financial services group that I qualified for, but I knew that I didn't want. And then that's when I introduced myself to the RSMs and like the EYs, and I walked around and I got to the accounting firms. And I hope that those recruiters thought that I did better. Because it really was like the very first like experience of like shaking somebody's hand and like being at a career fair. It's nerve wracking, and so
Oh yeah.
that's big tip for anyone on the line here. Talk to that one firm that you just don't care about. Still represent like yourself well, but if you mess up, like you don't have to worry about it because that's not the end all be all for you.
Hmm.
So, but to answer your question, I didn't give myself a score. If it was a score in like 1 to 10, I probably give myself like a negative like 4 because it was just so awkward. And I was just like quiet and like giggling and like it was
Hmm.
awkward. So,
I always tell
um,
people my two biggest tips. Number one is the first group you talk to needs to have like a bag that they're giving out because for some
yep,
reason at this career fair, everybody gives you so much stuff to carry. And then you're also trying to like shake hands and give out resumes and take business cards. And you're like, I can't carry anything
yeah,
else. And then the other one is nobody's looking at your shoes and you're going to be on your feet for 2 hours. Wear something comfortable.
comfortable. Yeah. And that's like a tip for the ladies too, because like everyone wears like heels, and it's like
Hmm.
I don't think I wore heels to my career fair. I think I wore like
I definitely
flats.
did and regretted it.
Yeah, I wore flats, and that's a pro tip. And the thing that you said about bags, it's really interesting because as a recruiter, like we love to give away swag, and something that KPMG, maybe this is like a pro tip, a secret. Now all the recruiters know. We always bring like little tiny like tote bags for that exact purpose. So
Hmm.
as folks are walking around, going to all the tables, and they're giving out like the stress balls, the pens, the notebooks, how are you gonna hold it, right? A lot
Right.
of folks don't bring the book bag in because it's just too clunky, right? So
You're gonna
we
hit
always
people
give
in
out
line.
literally. So we always give out like at least I give out little tiny like little tote bags, and then all you see going around that building is folks holding on to that KPMG bag. So it's just a little, and I think it incentivized like some students, like even if they knew that KPMG wasn't who they wanted to work for,
They're like,
or
I need a
I
bag.
need that bag because I have all of this stuff and I have nowhere to put
Yeah.
it.
I'm
So
like, okay, I will never forget Barfield Murphy in Alabama always gave out rainbow zebra stress balls. And that was like the hot commodity. Besides, I think like one of the firms gave out Starbucks gift cards. And
really,
yeah, and I was like, I need that stress ball. That's cool. It was very Lisa Frank, very like
oh
90s
my
kid
gosh,
vibes. Oh
Lisa
yeah.
Frank.
And it's like, I don't know how I'm gonna carry this. Like I have so much stuff.
Yeah.
Oh man. I'm like having cold sweat flashbacks to
Thinking back, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't want to go back to my career, and it was so hot because like there were so many people
Why?
there,
Yes.
right? And it's
Crank
like,
that AC. And then they always have like little tiny plates of food for you,
yes,
but you're like, okay, well there's no table. Like, how
and
do
like
I carry this?
you're shaking
Yes.
like 50 hands, like your hands are probably nasty. Like I remember when I came into my job in recruiting, it was during peak COVID,
Mm-hmm.
times. And so hand sanitizer, I don't even know if that stuff even works if you're using it as much as I was after every interaction. But for the first semester that I was a recruiter and I went to career fairs, I was just doing elbow bumps like every
Yep.
single time. I was like, no offense, I just have no idea. Like, and college campuses are just like not like it's an own ecosystem, right? Like, I just don't want to
Yeah.
shake your hand right now. I'm so sorry, but like, here's an elbow bump for you. But I'm glad things have, hopefully, knock on wood, have gotten a lot better, at least where I'm at. Um, and I just hope that students aren't as nervous and awkward as me. And I will say they probably are even more nervous because these students, the class that we're talking to right now, these are the students that have never been to a career fair. Like, maybe they've been to
Yep.
one because we've had one normal year, it seems. But I think these are the students that probably are more afraid than me. Like, I at least had mentors who, they're the seniors, 2 years above me. They're the ones that went to the career fairs, right? And so I had them to ask questions to. A lot of the students who are going to career fairs now, like, yeah, they might have like a mentor a year or two above them, but they may or may not. They might not have gone to a career fair because they might have gotten recruited during the COVID year. So it's an interesting, recruiting is just different now.
Yeah.
I'll say, but I think what remains is that people are just as nervous, people are just as awkward when it comes to their very, very first interaction.
Recruiters, they're just like you.
They're just like you. They really are.
So do you have maybe like a short list of like if you're going to your first career fair this fall, right?
Hmm.
So a few things that you should do and a few things that you should not do. And I'll give you one example is like when I planned Meet the Firms at Bama when I was a chapter president, I kept scissors at the check-in table because people would always not realize that the little X is
Yep, on
sewn
the
on
back
the
of
back
their.
of their jackets. And
Yep.
it's usually in like neon thread to
Yep.
indicate that it should be removed. Or like
Yep.
we had a student checking in one time that still had paper wrapped around the buttons on the
Oh
suit sleeve.
no.
And I was like, I cannot let you walk in like that. Like, step to the side for a sec. We're going to get this
You're
right.
you're a good chapter president because I didn't have scissors at my check-in desk. um, well, let me see. I mean, I think the one thing that I want to stress to students is that you can't make a second first impression. And on the topic of just attire, now that I'm a recruiter, I'm on the other side. Even if I was just a professional, like, I've seen some outfits that just do not represent somebody who's trying to make a good first impression. And so, um, I know some schools, they'll have the career fair like in their business school building, and so you might be walking in between class or whatever, and so you might be just walking by and you see KPMG and you want to talk to them. But the one thing that I would stress is that if even if you don't plan on talking to any particular firm, you you as a business student, you probably know that, hey, this is career fair week in the business building, so I probably should like dress up a little bit nicer just in case I come across somebody,
Hmm.
right? Um, so I don't want to see the folks where, I mean, this is more for the schools that have the career fair like in the normal, business school building, with where classrooms are at, but don't wear the sweats. Don't wear the
Yeah.
sweatpants
Don't
and
roll out
like,
of bed and come to the career fair.
yeah, don't do that. But just dress a little bit nicer. I mean, like, in terms of like attire now, like, I don't wear a suit to work, right? Like, that's just not our culture. It's
I don't think I've
smart.
ever worn a
I
suit to
don't
work.
I don't think I have, like, only for my interviews. Like, that was
Hmm.
it. But if you want to make a great first impression, like, Beta Alpha Psi people, like, you guys have suits. Like, I know that you do. Like, you're a part of a really great organization that
Yeah.
like
And if you
teaches you that.
don't, a lot of campuses these days actually have like an interview closet.
Yeah.
So check that out. You don't have to spend like an arm and a leg, but also be really careful about borrowing from friends because if it doesn't fit you well,
Yeah.
then I mean, honestly, I would say dress more business casual than wear a suit not
Exactly.
fitting.
And
Um,
that's where it's like if it's in the classroom building and you may or may not come across like you don't know who's going to be there, and
mhm.
to answer your question, like, one of the things that you should do is look, so you should know, but read ahead of time, all of the schools, they post that list of who's coming.
Yeah.
Do your research. Like that's so number one, it really should be do your research of who's coming and who you want to talk to. And then number two, when you do start talking to these folks, make a good first impression. Like I don't the one thing that I don't like to hear or to be asked, I should say, is like, what do you do? Like, what is your company all about? And it's like, you could have looked this like like before coming to
Yeah.
my table, and there's a line. You could just been on your phone looking up who we were. Like that's something that I think would be the best tip. Like that is the number one question not to ask. Like what's your company about, right? Because the recruiters, the professionals, they've been there all day already, and they've answered this question a number of times. So don't ask the question that's going to make you not memorable in a good way. Ask a memorable question that will have a good first impression of you because they'll remember, oh, like Mackenzie asked that question about, such and such is happening with my company. Like I didn't think that the students would know anything about that. Like that's what I think students need to prioritize, right? And making that first good impression. It's not just about, dressing the part is one thing, but then selling, who you are and proving yourself is another. And a nice suit can only get you so far. And if you can have a good conversation and treat it like a conversation, like again, we're recruiters, we're just like you. You don't have to think that we're these scary individuals. Like I promise I'm not a scary person. I promise you that I'm here to help you, but I can only help you as much as you've prepared yourself so that I know how to help you. And
Mhm.
I feel like I'm often digging for answers from students sometimes when I'm networking with them. And so if they can just come prepared, know a little bit about the company, have one question, even if that one question is applicable to every single company, make it a good question. Don't make
So
it the
give us
same
some
question.
examples of like some good questions.
Well,
What
I
can we
can
have in our
give
back pocket
so I'll
for
give you a question, maybe not for a career fair, but something that I always ask in my interviews is and I'll think a little bit as we talk more if I do come up with one for the networking piece. But let's say you did well and you got the interview. This is a question to end on, not to ask at the very beginning or like in the middle of your however many questions that you're able to ask, but this should be the last question that you ask. So time it right because you typically only get 30, 40 minutes for an interview. The one question that I personally always ask is now that you've gotten a chance to look at my resume and you've gotten to know me for now about 30 minutes or so, uh, are there any reservations that you have about hiring me for this job? Are there any concerns that you have about me, my experience? And then pause and then ask, how can I, can I correct that? Can I give you reasons as to why that shouldn't be a concern, right? And again, this goes all the way back to what I mentioned earlier about talking about failure, talking about, ways that you can improve. I just don't think students, people in general, are as comfortable asking that question and being faced with, you know,
the answer?
the
Yeah.
answer of like, well, this is a little bit concerning. Like I noticed this on your resume or whatever. And honestly, now that I think about it, that could be something that you say in a networking instance too, to answer your original question of what's a good question to ask. Um, maybe phrase it a little bit differently. Like, hey, like maybe you handed the resume over to the representative at the career fair. Ask them, like, hey, is there anything on my resume that looks kind of off? Like, what tips do you have for me? Because the one thing that I think people would be afraid of is answering that question
Mhm.
of or having that person answer the question and taking it right. And if the answer is that you don't have an answer of how you can correct that and make them feel more comfortable, then so be it. That might not be the right job because they're looking for somebody very specific, right? But being confident in asking that question, hearing the answer, and hopefully having a response to ease their
Yeah.
concerns is going to show that's memorable, right? That's what I said about being somebody that can be memorable in that recruiter in that professional's mind. um I think that's one question. There's plenty others, but that's the one that I always end on. um and I hope students, I told a couple students this. I don't know if they've actually asked it because it's a pretty bold question to ask a as a college student to somebody who has a couple more years of experience than you. um But it just shows that you can take criticism. That's what I think, and address it.
And that you're open to constructive criticism and you're
Yeah.
coachable. And I think
Yeah.
that's what every supervisor looks for.
Yep, exactly. So I think I did ask that question in all of my interviews when I came back to KPMG. I don't think it was a question I asked as a student, though. I asked it as a experienced hire professional, but I do think this is something, if you're bold enough, if you're able to address it, if you're able to, you know, be faced with it, then this is the question to ask. Um, and honestly, it puts the interviewer on the spot a little bit
It does, yeah.
because,
Kind of turns
like,
those
maybe
tables a little bit.
you have the control in your hands a little bit for that brief moment. And if they're comfortable sharing that, what they think that you need improvements on, you know, then they're going to share it. So, um, but I don't know if you've ever asked that in your interviews. I've asked it ever
Definitely
since.
not, but I will if I'm ever given the opportunity
if you're
again.
if you're ever given that opportunity. Yep.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, that's what I would say.
I love it. Anything else you'd like to add? Any advice for our students about recruiting, about accounting, about life in general?
Yeah. I would just say, I think that Beta Alpha Psi is definitely an organization that changed my life. Hopefully that has been delivered in in this session that you've been
Absolutely.
listening into. But just take advantage of that time in Beta Alpha Psi in college, right? Like, you're going to be a working professional, and that's the one thing that I think students will come to me and they'll try to like impress me as a recruiter. It's like, all these wonderful things that you do and fantastic, but like, enjoy it, because I wish I could go back to my Beta Alpha Psi years, right? Like,
Yep.
I'm a washed up alum, if you couldn't tell. I go back to Temple and I go to the Beta Alpha Psi meetings as much as I can, the Ascend meetings, and I just reminisce on what was. Um,
Hmm.
but Beta Alpha Psi, in all seriousness, they have such great resources. I guess one of the parting suggestions that I think every Beta Alpha Psi student, if they're given the opportunity, they should experience, more so on the e-board members, go to that annual meeting. I and I mentioned earlier when I answered the question that you asked Mackenzie about, what was I doing in my year in Beta Alpha Psi. In my years of Beta Alpha Psi, that one year that I was the chapter president, I was trying to rebuild, because we were just competing with a lot of orgs on campus. How do we be an attractive organization for students to even want to choose us? And, we got the funding from the school to go to the Beta Alpha Psi annual meeting. I believe the year that I went, it was summer 2018, right? Or no, 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 summer 2017, excuse me, summer 2017. And it was in Anaheim, California. There were four of us from the Temple chapter that went, and they had all these breakout sessions from all these different schools. And to see what these other schools were doing, and these were like the gold chapters that I was paying attention to, of like, how are they so successful, because I want to
Hmm.
be that. I learned so much, and I talked a lot about my university, and Mackenzie knows what my favorite Beta Alpha Psi chapter is. I'm gonna call them out in this session. But I sat through a best practices session, I think it was, at that annual meeting, and it was two chapters that I think that really stood out. But the one that I have really admired, I still pay attention to this day. I follow them on Instagram. Is FIU, Florida
Florida
International.
International.
They are, if Florida International University, if you are listening to
And I
this,
know they are.
I am so impressed by this org, this chapter specifically. Any Beta Alpha Psi chapter listening, pay attention to FIU, because they do it well, they do it right. And as an alum, not just of Temple, but of Beta Alpha Psi, like, that is a Beta Alpha Psi chapter that is the legacy that they have left and continue to leave year after year. And I say legacy, especially with COVID having caused mayhem, and like, in recruiting, in the higher ed space, like, it's just different. I, I do a bit of the judging for the goal chapter. I've done it now for 2 years, on the KPMG end. And that chapter, I've watched last year's video, this year's video. Like, they take the time and they really craft, who they are, and they are a memorable organization. And so I talked a lot about being memorable in a recruiting standpoint, networking, like even in like a beta alpha psi standpoint of like being that legacy, being memorable to the firms, like I just think that that chapter, I've admired them from, when I was a junior, and now I am years into my full-time job, and I still pay attention to that org, and it's something that it makes me happy to see, different chapters across the globe doing great things. But that's the one that I've always paid attention to, and I think any other Beta Alpha Psi students listening, pay attention to them the way that I have, because that's what helped me. The FIU is really the org that helped me figure out what do I have to do at Temple to fix this, right?
Yeah.
And they left a great legacy, and hopefully I was able to leave one as well at my alma mater. So that being said, I think that from a recruiting standpoint, like I think you guys just have to be, open and ready for that criticism. I'm really just kind of honing in on all the talking points that I had throughout the session, but being prepared, asking good questions, being memorable. Those are the tips that I'll leave with you, and maybe some of those stories that I told about my awkward run-ins and things like that, give you some insight on failing to be able to succeed. um, that's how I got here today, and being open to that failure and learning from it is definitely something that I hope that you gathered from my stories today. So but I think that's really it from my end of what I would say in terms of advice for those students.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. Definite shout out to my girl Diana, the VP of IT at FIU. Their Instagram handle is BAPFIU. You should all go follow them and check it out. I'll have it in the show notes as well. But yeah, I mean, if you guys want to hear more from us, please follow, subscribe, share, do all the social media things. If you're watching this, you already know we have a YouTube channel. You can find us at BAP Alums on Instagram, YouTube, and then we also have a Gmail account, BAPALUMS@gmail.com. So feel free to shoot us a note. Let us know if you have any additional questions for Mary. I'll make sure to plug her LinkedIn in the show notes as well. So send her a thank you if you're listening for taking the time. And Mary, we so appreciate having you on the podcast. We'll probably have to have you back, I'm assuming, from the questions I'm expecting to receive. But yeah, we just so appreciate you having the time, guys. And until next time, this has been the Becoming a Professional podcast. Thanks, everybody. Hi, everyone. McKenzie with the credits. This episode, titled Campus Recruiting 101, was hosted by Mackenzie Gravett with special guest Mary Tang. The episode was edited by Riley Ramos. Music was sourced from Resolute Audio and Fine Tune Media on Adobe Stock. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode of Becoming a Professional.